Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member for Parkdale-High Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in starting my remarks, I would definitely like to thank my fabulous colleague from Scarborough Rouge River for her remarks and for the great representation she provides for the constituents of Scarborough Rouge River. And I'm happy to participate in debate on Bill C-3, an act to enact the Aviation Industry Indemnity Act, to amend the Aeronautics Act, the Canada Marine Act, the Marine Liability Act, and the Canada Shipping Act of 2001, and to make consequential amendments to other acts. And so as folks can well imagine, it does make a number of changes to a number of pieces of legislation, and as my colleague has said, the NDP will be supporting this bill at third reading because it does make modest improvements to this existing piece of legislation. Although we did make some proposed amendments to the bill which we thought would strengthen it significantly. Unfortunately, the government was not open to those amendments. But let me just briefly describe what the bill pretends to do, or proposes to do, I should say. Part 1 enacts the Aviation Industry Indemnity Act to indemnify the aviation industry for the cost of damages in the event of what they call interferences for things like armed conflict or attack, things that normally would be outside the normal operation of the aviation industry, a crisis of some kind. Part 2 would amend the Aeronautics Act to provide the airworthiness investigative authority with the powers to investigate aviation accidents or incidents involving civilians and aircraft or aeronautical installations operated by or on behalf of the Department of National Defence, the Canadian Forces, or a visiting force. Part 3 amends the Canada Marine Act in relation to the effective day of the appointment of a director of the Port Authority. Part 4 amends the Marine Liability Act to implement in Canada the International Convention of Liability and Compensation for damage in connection with the carriage of hazardous and noxious substances by sea. That's a 2010 convention, which basically establishes a liability scheme to compensate victims in the event of a spill of hazardous or noxious substances, and it puts a limit to that liability, which the Act details. And Part 5 introduces requirements for operators of oil handling facilities, including the requirement to notify the Minister of their operations and to submit plans to the Minister. Generally, Mr. Speaker, as I said, the NDP supports this bill, but we believe that there shouldn't be a limit to the liability, because we don't believe that Canadians should be on the hook for cleanup costs and damages following a spill of hazardous and noxious substances. The Conservatives have even refused reasonable amendments that would increase the liability. So Canadians ultimately would be on the hook if the damages exceed that liability. But basically, New Democrats are committed to preventing spills on our coasts whatsoever. We want to ensure that we have an effective Coast Guard, that we have effective environmental precautions so that our coasts are protected. And we do question the government when they take actions like closing down BC's Oil Spill Response Centre. If you want to make the coast safer, why would you close down the Oil Spill Response Centre, shutting down the Kitsilano Coast Guard Station, and gutting environmental emergency response programs? These don't sound like the actions of a government that has the interests of the safety of Canadians as their priority. But as I said, there are some positive parts of this bill. The required pilotage and increased surveillance is a small step in the right direction. But the bill is very limited in its scope. The government, we believe, needs to reverse the effects of the drastic cuts of last year's budget on tanker safety to really be effective. And if we're talking about tanker safety, let's take a look at some of the more recent statistics about tanker safety. Tanker traffic has increased dramatically and therefore has created an increased risk of an oil spill in Canadian waters. And yet the federal government decreases marine communication traffic centers and environmental emergency programs, even though estimates state that oil tanker traffic has already tripled between 2005 and 2010, and that oil tanker traffic is planned to triple again by 2016. So we're seeing dramatically increased oil tanker traffic, which would require stronger measures by this government. Proposed pipeline expansion projects would increase crude deliveries from 300,000 to 700,000 barrels per day. So we're seeing a tremendous increase in traffic. And yes, we should have the strongest precautionary measures possible, Mr. Speaker. And one of the precautionary measures is to ensure that the polluter pays, so that if there is a spill, if there is a problem, which hopefully there isn't and that hopefully we can prevent, but that the polluter pays for that damage that is caused. But we know what this government's record is when it comes to environmental protection. We've seen in omnibus budget bill after omnibus budget bill the extent of the cuts, the gutting of environmental protections, Mr. Speaker, the changes to the Navigable Waters Act. I know a major urban heritage river, the Humber River, runs through my riding of Parkdale-High Park. It is truly a national treasure, which is why it was deemed to be a heritage river, and it has been delisted from the navigable waters protection, all except the very mouth of the river. And that's of great concern to conservationists, to biologists, to the community at large, which is why New Democrats are trying to get that river and many other rivers put back under the protection of the Navigable Waters Act. But there are other changes this government is making as well in aviation safety, and that's one of the issues addressed in this bill. I know in my riding of Parkdale-High Park, it's home to many flight attendants and pilots, people who work in the aviation industry, and one of the issues that is of great concern to them is the number of flight attendants on aircraft. And we all remember, at least in Toronto, we all remember back in 2005 when Air France Flight 358 crashed at Toronto Pearson. And it was a horrific crash. When you first saw the smoke and fire, you wondered, would anyone survive? But the cabin crew, was a full complement of cabin crew, managed to evacuate all the passengers from that burning aircraft in less than 90 seconds. Talk about professionalism. Talk about dedication. They were exemplary. And we know from a history of aviation accidents that the more flight attendants there are positioned at emergency exits improves every passenger's chance of escaping and surviving in the event of an aircraft accident. Now, we've seen before this government's attempt to reduce the number of flight attendants on aircraft. Right now the ratio has been 1 to 40, and they're trying to reduce that by 25% and increase it to 1 in 50. And I believe that that is fundamentally wrong, and it could be very dangerous for the traveling public. So again, Mr. Speaker, I see my time is wrapping up. While we do support this bill, we have many other concerns about public safety, environmental protection, And frankly, the scope of the changes in this bill are very limited. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.